Hello, Richard, Alex, and John. I don't like these mid-gen consoles. They seem to have damaged the generational cycle with the long cross-gen games. Sony doesn't need the PS5 Pro. Would it not be better to just have this generation shorter by a couple of years, then extend it by rather than extend it by a couple, extending the next gen? You can kind of see his point, right, John?
I mean, yeah, but I think the problem is fundamentally games aren't made the same way they used to be. They take too long to make now. And I mean, that is actually a problem in itself. But in the past, a new machine comes out and you'd have a lot of games within the first year, and then you'd already talking sequels and sequels to sequels, all within like a 4-year span, right? And that's just, now it's taking like 4 or 5 years for new games to get made. The investment
we haven't even seen a new Naughty Dog game.
Right. So
PS5.
like, it's so different from what it used to be. Like, I too love that old model. I thought that was awesome. But the games, the big games, and a lot, even medium games, like just game development in general, takes longer than it ever has. And I don't think it's realistic to expect that anymore. And beyond that, with the way hardware evolves, it's no longer like the reason. In the past, when you had big shifts, it was because technology was growing so fast, and like they were able to implement such new things that were so fundamentally different from hardware that came before it. Those types of leaps, that doesn't happen anymore. So it's literally just like taking a lot of the same things that we've had for years now and improving upon it and adding in features. And if not every game even needs to take advantage of those features or wants to or is, right? So it almost doesn't make sense to hold it back from cross-gen, because it's not like the games, it's not that the hardware is the limiting factor or like, oh, it's a cross-gen game, so it's more the developers themselves and what they're technically capable of, what their targets are. Like, that's more the limiting factor. It's manpower more than anything else, and just time and money and all that, rather than hardware. I think just launching more new hardware wouldn't, like, what if the PS5 Pro, like he says, make it shorter? Well, that's also a limitation as to how fast hardware can even be made these days. Like, the PS5 Pro will probably be the best thing Sony could do at this given point. So what's the difference between calling it a PS5 Pro and the PlayStation 6? It's not that different.
Because it's just a bigger GPU.
Right. I mean, they could have done more on the CPU stuff. They could have done more, but I'm sure that would also massively balloon the cost even further. Like, I think there's just a limit to what's feasible these days. And I think we just kind of have to accept that games are made differently. They take longer to make now. And yeah, I often would say, yeah, I'd be happier with lesser, smaller projects, but thankfully those still exist. AAA is not everything. There's a lot of games being made, and a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Did the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X diminish the shininess of PS5 and Series X?
I don't think so, because the prior generation lived pretty much just as long, didn't it? And by the end of that generation, the PS Triple and the 360, but especially the Triple, that was not in a good spot. Like, the last half of that gen is real bad. There's a lot of really poorly running games out there. And I would actually...
PS4 fared better, though.
The PS4 actually fared shockingly well. And it turned out great in the end. And I think that's partially just due to the way the PS4 Pro was kind of upgraded in a very natural way to support higher resolution, but it wasn't so different that, like, if you were targeting a high-res Pro game, you'd basically be able to do the same on the regular PS4 at a lower resolution with similar performance. That's what we got. So I think it's just like these mid-gen consoles is just kind of like the reality of where hardware, software, and everything is at the moment. And if they said, no, we're just going to release the PS6 5 years after PS5, then, well, that would be next year. And
what if they didn't do the PS5 Pro at all, and then
that's what I'm saying.
2028 plan?
Well, then he's saying that would it not just be better to have this generation shorter by a couple years? 2028 would still be 8 years. So it wouldn't have satisfied that criteria either. It would be just as long, just without the mid-gen.
I think, but I don't think the PS5 Pro is extending the generation.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I think it's just an option for those who want higher performance.
Yep.
And I think maybe there was a damaging factor with PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, because they were basically an intermediate step that were attempting to address a 4K screen. And you got some pretty good 4K presentations, right?
Arguably better than some stuff we have today.
And so,
Yes.
and so when PS5 and Series X came along, you know, the 4K shininess of it wasn't quite as pronounced, and it wasn't helped by the fact that a lot of the games, if not almost all of the games, were still playable on the Xbox One X. And the PS4 Pro, indeed. So, you know, that kind of natural sort of massive generational leap was less pronounced. I think it's probably, the One X in particular was probably more damaging to Microsoft with Series X than the 4 Pro was to the PS5, because the 4 Pro was kind of underbaked, if we're being brutally honest. Whereas the One X was, you know, a simply terrific machine when it came out in 2017, to the point where, you know, what we saw with back compat was that it couldn't double the performance. The Series X couldn't double the performance on back compat on challenging games. It could only get so far. So maybe there was some element of damage there. But I think the mitigating factor is that ultimately those machines didn't sell a huge amount, the 4 Pro and the One X. It's like there was like an 80-20 split between them when they were available. So it probably wouldn't have had as much of an impact as we believe, simply because, you know, they weren't selling as much as the base consoles, which were a lot cheaper. Anything to add, Alex?
I don't like you. I don't think it's extending the generation. I guess the only thing is like the subjective feeling, where because they did all their, if you didn't buy a PS5 Pro, then you don't get that feeling. But if you watch all the marketing materials, like last gen, they switched over all the marketing at some point to just be PS4 Pro and Xbox One X. And then you found out what the base console was like usually when the game came out.
Yeah, Red Dead was the classic example where, you know, it was Xbox hosted the best and the worst versions.
Yeah. So you do lose a little bit of like for example, now, like if they start showing all these PS5 games running on PS5 Pro with completely different image quality than the base PS5 version, which is just going to happen now because Sony's going to do that. And then the big thing they're going to show off next gen is we've got AI upscaling. Then it's kind of lost at that point. You didn't like have that like revolutionary, oh yeah, that's a big thing. So it kind of takes away like the subjective like feeling of generations. But on PC, it's been like that forever, and I still get excited about like hardware coming out. The pace is higher on PC, but you know, I still get excited about new hardware as long as it's doing interesting things. Yeah, I think it's fine.